The same stuff that football helmets are made out of. They're really fairly indestructible, and they are surprisingly monofunctional, which for a technology to do one thing is kind of refreshing. So there's not nearly the distraction factor presented by these as there is in a more multifunctional technology tool like the Chromebooks or the computer labs. Please don't throw those on the ground. It's basically a keyboard with a screen. You can see 3 lines of text at once, which again for certain writing activities would maybe be problematic. For more grammar accuracy focused activities, I think the constraint and focus is actually a value add. You focus right in on what are you trying to say now versus the expanse of expression that might be on the entire page. But you wouldn't necessarily want to write a 6-page essay paper on the Neos for several reasons. But it's cool. Portable technology, like internet-wise, the apocalypse would come and my class could still do linguistic accuracy with the Neos. It's not an internet Wi-Fi device. It uses infrared technology like your remote control, so it sends things via this little infrared signal. And then there's this receiver that you plug into the USB port of your computer.
You have to have a computer.
What's that? You do have to have a computer on the receiver end, but that computer does not have to have access to the internet. What's kind of your expectation of something you would try to do with the Neos, or when would you use the Neos?
I use them all the time for 10-minute paragraphs.
Great. So from a grammar perspective, in the linguistic accuracy classes, you have the 10-minute paragraphs. So let's say I wanted to give my students a prompt. Okay. I want them to write in response to this question. If I actually want them to have this prompt here from the pickup zone on their Neo device, we can accomplish that by going Command O. Would you like to keep the current file? Your student should always understand that the digital content on the Neo is kind of one-time use. Anything that they want after the class period should be sent into the teacher, and that's when you keep it. If you leave something, the next person that picks it up is likely going to delete it. So Y for yes, no, Y for no. Do you want to stay connected to NeoLab Mac 3? That's that computer. I want to say yes, and then hit enter. Open from. I'm wanting to open up from NeoShare.
Okay, I missed something.
Sure.
Deborah's essay is here.
Yeah.
And
So hit Command O.
Yeah.
okay.
Say no by pressing N. So you've selected yes. You just hit enter.
Oh, you must have said, did you not stay connected?
Okay.
I don't know.
Then you want to open from NeoShare, which is the name of that application. Okay, so you've got the prompt. The student can use the arrow keys, which they'll get used to using the arrow keys, down to the bottom, and then right. Other applications for this, I could write 10 sentences and have them pick up that file and then correct the sentences and send them back to me. Or I could have, again, thinking maybe outside of grammar specifically, I could have a journal question, or they they could write about what they read from the book, or any sort of open response, that I'd rather have them type than write, and yet I don't necessarily want to take the time to go down to the computer lab on either end of the activity.
So when they're done typing their, paragraphs, how do you see them? Do you look at each individual?
Great. That's a great lead-in question to what I'll show you now. So they've answered the task. They've responded appropriately. Whether or not you've responded doesn't really matter, because I'm not going to read your answers. If you hit Command Send, if you haven't yet confirmed that you want to stay connected, it will ask that question, but you all just answer that question. Send to NeoShare. Then you're going to give it a file name. I recommend your name. You'll notice I received the files there. I can do a quick roll call. My students can check. I see that Maria's received those. Nanya, I'm guessing that is Carrie. And it suddenly becomes, oh, Rebecca. Let's see, Natalie, can you help Rebecca? Or if you see your name here, but you don't see your neighbors, Aaron. I then can save these files here. So I'm going to create a new folder.
Did you have to create you need software on your computer?
Yeah, there is software you can download. You just Google NeoShare, and it will you can download.
And that's where you save all your stuff?
No, you save your stuff. In this case, I saved it to my desktop.
Okay, so it can be saved anywhere, and you need to have that software or whatever?
Yeah, in order to connect to the receiver and receive things from it. You need to have it. So here from Aaron, I know nothing about whether or not she agrees or disagrees with that statement, but that's okay. I have her file here. You'll notice that it's in a plain text format, which doesn't allow me to do any formatting of that text. If I want to maybe make it double spaced or add, some textual features to it, underline or bolding, I would need to convert it to a rich text format to do that, and then I could print it or do whatever I needed that way. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and if you want to return it to your students, you have to print it out with the corrections,
Good,
right?
you would think, but no, you can actually have them then pick up an electronic file and then start. So let's say that I want them to keep writing on the same task that they did the previous day, but again, it's not still on their device. So I'll pick up, instead of just a prompt that I want them to pick up, I'll pick up their files. So now they can, when they go to Command O, again, we don't keep the current file, open from NeoShare. It's going to list out the files that are available for pickup. Arrow down to your own. And then you've picked up the file. So you could do an iterative task, which for the purposes of linguistic accuracy or one of those curricular components that has you, have them write on something one day, give them feedback, have them write on it again another day. You can do that.
Sorry, one more question.
Sure.
It seems like I'm the only one who doesn't completely understand this. But where would you make the corrections? Like once you
Good.
have their
It depends on what you're wanting to do. If I was doing more like a dialogic activity, like a journal response, and I wanted to just type a comment to the student based on what they wrote, I could do that right in the file and then have it available for them to pick up. They pick it up, they see, they have what they wrote, then what I wrote in the response, then they could write some more or write in response to a different question. For like the linguistic accuracy curriculum where you're actually going to use like error markings or something, for that I would print it off and then have the markings be on a physical sheet of paper with them doing either corrections on that sheet of paper or after they return, after they get the file back, then using the feedback on that physical piece of paper and making the digital corrections.
I have a question. So, along with NeoShare, it said you could share it through Google Docs.
Yeah, I haven't ever really set that up.
Okay.
What I would guess is that you need to be logged into the Google Docs on the receiver computer.
Okay.
But like I said,
No, I was just
I-
wondering.
haven't done it. So Google is as good as me in terms of the ins and outs of that. Other questions about using the Neos? If you teach 4th hour, good luck, because I'll be using all of them. But outside of that, they are a great tool to be used in a lot of different classroom applications.
Why will you be using all of them?
I'm teaching a mega section of both tracks of academic B and university prep.
Oh my
in the
goodness.
chapel for linguistic accuracy.
Wow.
So, we're wanting to see like how big can we make it before it works.
Before you break,
Or
that's
I
a lot
think
of
it sounds like
right.
Yeah, Natalie will be with me. I'll have some classroom support to manage the load of that. But yeah, it will be an interesting experiment.
Hey, if it's gonna break the teacher, just saying.
Because he just has to be
Very cool. All right, well, we'll move from the Neos now to what we'll talk about for the rest of the time. But before we do that, I've summed the theory of what we are about to say, like every good academic, down to a chart. And I made the last group fill out the chart, but I'll just show you what's on the chart. On the y-axis, we have the accuracy of expression. On the x-axis, we have certainty of what a student or a person is trying to say. As certainty increases of what you are trying to say, the logical conclusion is their accuracy will also increase. So if I'm having issues with the accuracy that a student's demonstrating, one way I can hopefully increase that accuracy is by increasing their certainty of what it is they're actually trying to say. And that's the principle behind this lecture. It leans more towards, at least in function, the academic end of what we do. But I think at every level you can find applications of giving the students a functional framework to follow and it helping them to manage the cognitive load of expression. If they are maxed out in terms of figuring out what it is they're trying to say, there's not going to be any cognitive resources to be applied at how well they're saying it. We're monitoring their accuracy. So if we can minimize that cognitive load on what they're trying to say, give them a framework to follow, then they'll be that much more successful in their expression. So in this case, we get what our students have a plan for, and we might promote the ideals of expression. We've given them the raw materials that they've needed. We've articulated an expectation, and what do we get? Not quite this, but it has a door and some windows, right? So it's all there, I promise. Right? What's missing between here and here? It's really this. It's having a plan, knowing what goes where and why it goes there. And that's what we want to provide our students with, so that as they build a wall, they put this wall here relative to this wall here. There's an order and a sequence, and then they can focus on the quality of their expression. If we look at kind of characteristics of good writing, and we've operationalized here good writing that would receive a maximum score on an assessment, in this case the TOEFL. To receive a maximum score, a writer must effectively address the task and the topic. They find the information about what the task and the topic are from the prompt. Here I've marked in green the topic for the prompt, and in blue, the task. Helping students to understand the difference between the task and the topic is kind of a critical skill. The task that the student's supposed to do in this instance is support or oppose a particular choice, giving a single option, or given two options to oppose or support something. Which do they choose, and why? And more importantly, and most importantly, that they're using specific reasons and examples to support their answer. In the prompt as well, we also have information about the topic or the subset of language that they're going to need to manipulate in completing the task. We can look at that topic at a specific level. In this case, there's this effect of a shopping center. If we pull back a little bit, though, we have a general topic of development or change, and helping our student to recognize the big picture, and then the focus is also critical to their success. The student in their writing needs to display unity, progression, and cohesion. We'll talk about how they can do those three things. They need to display consistent facility. So we start here kind of with an articulation of the grammar expectations. They need to display a consistent or accurate ability in the use of their language. They also need to demonstrate variety, appropriate word choice, and idiomaticity. And again, if they don't know what it is that they're trying to say, they're not going to have the cognitive resources that they need to check these characteristics as they go along. Our students should always know that, particularly when they're presented with a constraint, no one's expecting them to be perfect, and in their attempt to be perfect, they'll maybe display other undesirable characteristics like a lack of fluency. If they can have one great sentence, error-free sentence, but if the task was to complete an essay, that attempt to be perfect or without error has actually undermined their success. Their expression on the TOEFL and in most language use instances needs to be complete, meaning it's met the demands of the task, and it needs to be proficient. In terms of support, the writing should be well developed. That development should consist of explanations, exemplifications, or examples, and they've also provided details, and we'll talk about each of those functions. I think it's helpful for our students to always know who's evaluating their writing. In the case of the TOEFL, as opposed to the ELC, there are two raters that rate the student's essay on the TOEFL. One of them is human, or a humanoid. I mean, we don't know how human they are. Homo sapiens, sapiens. The other is an E-rater, which in some cases might be more human than the other rater, that's going to be evaluating their essay. An E-rater is just like a euphemism for a machine that we don't really have to pay. Both of which are going to assign a writing a performance score of 1 to 5, and as long as there's agreement within plus minus 1 on that rating, then the rating stands. If there's disparity, then a second human rater enters and rates it again. First impressions matter in life and in language. The person who's evaluating a student's performance starts making their evaluation well before they actually process the language or read what the student wrote. What they see does affect how they approach the rest of their evaluation. Shape matters in life and in language. The visual shape has an effect that is pretty pervasively impacting. We haven't read anything that this writer had to say, but what are our judgments that we're going to start making about the writing?
Introduction.
They can use paragraph.
Okay, it's complete, it's conventional, right? It's meeting these norms that I've come to expect from this type of task. What else can we say about the writer?
It appears that there may be an introduction and a conclusion.
Good. We're going to be more confident that they've met some of these other rhetorical demands of an introduction and conclusion. A little bit more about the body.
Paragraphs are awfully long.
Okay.
They probably have details.
We're going to make the assumption that there's some details. What about kind of symmetry or balance? Okay. It looks like they're similarly developed the first point relative to the second point. That suggests control and deliberateness behind their writing. Have we said a single bad thing about this student's writing? Like, no. So as we look to, and as humans, the process is, let's confirm our initial impression. So if I'm coming at this piece of writing with a lot of positive expectations, I'm going to look for evidence to support my positive first impressions, and I'm maybe going to diminish critical information that would say otherwise. So it gives me the best chance of that first impression sticking. What about this student's shape? What does it suggest?
Strings of sentences.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Stream of consciousness. There's like, they clearly had a lot to say. Am I confident it was on task? No. In fact, I'm maybe making an expectation that it's not going to be on task, that it's going to be a little bit rambling and disordered that way.
They know something about indentation.
Okay, right.
They don't know.
They got it once. Okay, so but that's almost kind of confusing, right? Because if they knew to do it here, like where is it again, Ethan?
I would be kind of overwhelmed. Like I don't want to read this whole huge
Right.
chunk.
Yeah, it's like, oh, please no, right? There is definitely an immediate diversion. Other expectations? We see this a lot with placement rating before students really kind of understood the fact that we separate our ideas so that they are distinct. With a little bit of training, we start to see this, right? They understand that there's paragraphing. What else can we expect? What's the story that this picture paints for us?
They ran out of time.
Good, yeah. There's this idea that the clock was working against the student. They really didn't have the control of the expression or the rhetorical task to manage the time. And we've got what I call the full snake. It's got that wildebeest right past its head. They just kind of got overdone in that first idea. Again, speaking to maybe their organization, their use of available time, their expressive flexibility. By the time they got through this, there wasn't much time left for the rest. At no point, in no description of the expectations on the ELC's rubric or on ETS's rubric or in kind of actful descriptions about writing proficiency, does it say that the golden standard is 5 paragraphs. We really need to avoid teaching our students that vain and repetitious tradition of our forefathers. Okay? The golden standard of good writing is not 5 paragraphs. In fact, from both a substance and an appearance perspective, which of these two samples of writing is more impressive? Good, here, right? We've got more development. The likelihood that this person's using a range of syntactic features is greater here because they've developed those ideas further. So what should a student do? Should they swing for the fences and try for 3 paragraphs? There's no advantage to them, and there's a lot to speak to a disadvantage to them if they can't. Now, is it true that if a student could similarly develop a 3rd body paragraph, that that would be a desirable thing, naturally, right? But not at the expense of completing the task. What happens with a lot of students is they'll get this. They'll have 3 body paragraphs and then no conclusion. How do you evaluate that in terms of completing the task if the product isn't complete? It really does create a ceiling effect of what's possible for them to receive. So what we're going to go through now is the functions that are occurring in a 30-minute essay. And I know that this is going to seem writing heavy because it's about writing. But I think there are principles here that helping our students to understand the functional components to any expression helps them to better produce good language, be it writing or reading. We're going to present the functions first in the order that a reader would come across them in the sample of writing, but we'll see when we get to showing the writing process that this order that's presented here on the page is not the order by which the writer will express themselves. So if we look at the introduction, functions that the writer needs to do in the introduction include establishing the general topic, narrowing to the specific topic and task from the prompt. They meet the opponents. Almost all rhetorical tasks break down to this one task. Given a number of choices, choose one and explain why you chose that one. Acknowledging the counter-argument. Students are always going to want to be fair and balanced in their presentation. They're like, well, can I say how I both agree and disagree? Sure. As long as you don't say, I'm agree, and disagree. Like, the reality is like, no, for you, my friend, you should probably just say whether you agree or you disagree. But acknowledging the counter-argument can get that out of their system. Like, but there's this one thing that makes me not agree with my own self. Like, okay, well, acknowledge it as your counter-argument and then move on. And just state and support a single position. And then in the end of the introduction, we summarize the support. Notice in this articulation of functions, they didn't use the word thesis. Why?
Because we're all grad students and have been writing a thesis, and it gives us PTSD.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure if you want to like lay down on the couch and talk about your past for a moment. Okay, there might be some of that. We don't thesis, right? We don't, it's a noun, it's not a verb. And I think a lot of these descriptions of rhetorical features or functions that we've adopted in our explanation of writing to a second language learner that hasn't gone through the system where they've over and over been taught about theses and how to write them, it's really ambiguous and obscure. I'd much rather have my students dealing with verbs that talk about doing something than nouns that describe something that they should have done. I think it's more instructive. So the functions here are appropriate, and the functions here are purposefully more descriptive than thesis statements and topic sentences. Because from a language perspective, what does that really mean? In the body paragraphs, we're going to follow a similar template in terms of the functions that we'll look for in our writing. We identify the supporting idea. I'll even refer to this as the topic sentence because it's easy and convenient to use that label, even though it makes me a little bit uncomfortable from a language instruction perspective. We've identified the supporting idea. Next, we need to define or describe key terms or processes from that supporting idea. We need to explain how our supporting idea strengthens our position. We need to apply the supporting idea to a specific situation. And then we need to restate our supporting idea using other language. When we get down to seeing these things, we'll show that not only are these discrete functions, but each of these functions have discrete kind of language characteristics. So there's a grammar for definition. There's a grammar for applying a specific idea that helps us to make our grammar instruction a little bit more meaningful and contextualized. That's really weird. Can anyone else see like the previous? I don't know if it's just because I've done the presentation twice in 2 days. Anyway, down to the conclusion. We're going to, like we did in the introduction, we're going to summarize our support. That's why for the read. We're going to restate our position. And then we're going to identify 3 actions or consequences. We're making the assumption that we've been so effective in our expression that the reader now agrees with us, and they are just hungry for a call to action or something that they can do, right? And this is where the students will often be like, well, my writing teacher says we're not supposed to introduce new information in our conclusion. Okay, like, well, what are you supposed to do? You can only read twice, and then you have to start saying something else. And it's true that you shouldn't add additional support for your position into the conclusion, but you do have something to say. Either talk about what someone should do, or talk about what will happen when they don't do what you told them to do. With the risk of making you hungry if you didn't get lunch today, we'll go ahead with an application, applying what we've learned. Another principle that we should emphasize here is that if we're wanting to focus on the quality of language that someone's producing, we need to ease back on the functional demands of the task or the topic that they're doing. So this isn't a likely candidate for a TOEFL prompt or for an ELC 30-minute essay prompt, because it's just not expecting as much as we should be able to expect at that level, but it should give us an ability to see these principles in action with a little bit more manageable language demands. Within this prompt, we've got the task. What is the task?
Identify and then use specific reasons and examples.
Yes. And the superlative is important because it teaches us what? How many foods will we be talking about? One. Right? Again, they need to understand that this isn't asking you for several good lunch foods for college students. It's asking you for one, and then to explain reasons why that one is the one. If we look at the topic, there's the specific topic of lunch food for college students. If we pull back a little bit in talking about food and the choices that people make relative to the foods that they have, we are also addressing culture. So now comes the time for decision making, right? The task is for us to choose one. We need to choose one. Does it matter which one we choose? No. And our students need to understand that. You'll be evaluated not based on the answer that you choose, but on how well you express your selection of that answer. So given this, I've articulated a position. I don't teach my students to use note paper or scratch paper. I don't teach them to outline or pre-write. Why? Because the clock is ticking. And I know that the students only have so many words they can write in 30 minutes. I want all of those words to be on the screen and not on note paper that doesn't get turned in, or they don't get credit for it. So on my screen, typed out, in response to this question, my position is that the best food for college students at lunch is leftover pizza. I'm going to write that down. It's going to make its way into my essay, but it's not going to be the first thing that the reader reads. There are other functions that need to precede it, but it makes the most sense for me to start writing with a very clear, articulated position on the topic to the task. Next, I'm going to identify the supporting reasons for my position. So why is leftover pizza the best lunch food? Well, leftover pizza is quick and convenient. Leftover pizza is cheap. Leftover pizza is nutritionally balanced. We have 3 solid supporting reasons here. We've talked about whether or not we need 3. We don't. It's more important for us to finish the task at hand. Which 2 do I keep? Cassie, what do you think?
2 that I can write most about.
Okay, good. The most, the fastest, right? Yeah. The easiest. I can choose the easiest? Yes, you should choose the easiest. Right? Again, my selection here, I don't get points for being novel, I don't get points for being innovative, I just get points for expressing myself well. So choosing the easiest, the most, the ones that are going to be the fastest for me to express is a good idea. If I am so flexible and they're all equally easy, which 2 do I choose?
The ones that are less, that are creating less controversy.
Okay, good. So there might be some selection of things that are the most normed, the most acceptable. You want to choose the 2 that are the farthest apart. that are going to generate an opportunity for me to use the most variety of language possible. So in here, if I look at this idea between something being quick and convenient and something being cheap, I'm really talking about conservation of resources in both regards. Like it's not going to demand as much of me linguistically as if I write about this one and this one. So we sideline one of the ideas. In this case, I'm going to actually just delete it from my computer screen. Maybe make note of it somewhere else if I can't remember it for 30 minutes. But if I can't remember it for 30 minutes, I probably shouldn't write about it. And I'm going to develop these two ideas. So now we get to the actual task of writing. I've written my position statement. It's going to end up in my introduction. I've written this sentence here that articulates a supporting idea for my position. It's now becoming the first sentence of my body paragraph. What's the function here? Well, I've identified the supporting idea. Next, I'm going to define or describe key words from the supporting idea. What's the critical idea that I want to make sure my reader understands? This concept of something being quick and convenient. In this instance, likely my reader knows what those words mean and could probably make the connection between a food that's quick and convenient. You know, it's not a fast runner. It's not on every corner. So I'll want to maybe point the reader, and the academic rhetoric expectation would be for me to clarify what I mean by these key terms. So preparing a lunch of leftover pizza requires no time and no preparation. A little bit of a simplification because I do have to open up the fridge, pick it up, and put it in my backpack. And maybe in a plastic bag and then in my backpack.
Then you have to microwave it too, right?
No,
No.
eat it cold.
Oh,
It's an American thing, you probably don't understand.
yeah, I don't understand.
I would microwave it.
Thank you.
I would actually use a griddle because if you don't heat it up hotter than 212
Then it's not
degrees,
convenient.
your gluten doesn't get stiff in your dough, so it crisps, but it's not chewy.
Wow.
But if we're not talking about that because that's not particularly quick or convenient, so I'm just going to gloss over that reality. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to explain. Note how the grammar's changing here, right? In identifying, I want to be as kind of direct as possible. I'm using short, simple, straight language in this function. When I get down to this explain function, there's going to be a little bit more grammatical complexity to what it is that I'm trying to do. Often I'm going to be using more of a causative structure. What am I explaining? I'm explaining how something that's quick and convenient makes it the best for college students. Okay, for college students, using their time wisely is the difference between succeeding and failing. A college student who is preparing lunch is better off using that time to study, sleep, or socialize. Also note here, when I'm talking about a fact, using third-person language as opposed to here. The next function I'm looking to do is to apply the supporting idea to a specific situation. My freshman year, you can't use I in an academic task. You need to use third-person singular. Well, how well do you use third-person singular? I would recommend maybe using first-person when you can. And you can. If we remember back to the prompt, the writer was invited to use supporting details and examples to support their opinion. Well, my opinion is derived from my experiences, so I've been invited to use first-person language. And again, as a recommendation to maximize levels of accuracy, let's let them use personal narrative. The chances of them having good, consistent, clear examples is better using that first-person language. So my freshman year, I had early morning classes. Waking up late because of late night studying or socializing meant that I would either have to be late for class or skip lunch. On days when I had leftover pizza, I didn't have to make that choice. I could be to class on time and have brought a lunch. What's that?
And everybody lives happily ever after.
Exactly, yeah. Eating pizza. It's leftover. It means that they had pizza before.
Cold
That's
pizza.
double good thing. Restating the supporting idea using a little bit different language, connecting back to my position, even ordering fresh fast food, which was another one of the choices but not the choice, isn't as convenient or as fast as packing a lunch of leftover pizza. If we look at what this screen now looks like, I've got my position statement there, guiding my expression, keeping me on track on my position. I've got the paragraph, how's it looking, fairly well developed. I've got this other sentence here that's hanging out, just begging me to turn it into a paragraph. That's what we're going to do. We've already done this function of identifying what the supporting idea of the paragraph is. We're going to jump down to defining or describing. This is definitely going to be something that I need to kind of explain here, right? What do you mean pizza is nutritionally balanced? It's not a health food unless you're Michelle Obama, but that's another discussion point. Unlike many other convenience foods, pizza contains foods from all the major nutrition groups: grains, vegetables, fruits, meats, and dairy. It's nutritionally balanced. What do we mean? Food that's nutritionally balanced becomes the best food for college students. Well, let me tell you, staying fueled and healthy can help a student succeed because a healthy body is a healthy brain. The more you know.
It's a little bit of a stretch.
Again, I'm not going to be evaluated in how much I stretch things. It's my expression, and so far I'm on track. Here again, I'm applying, using my personal experiences or experiences that I say are my personal experiences, but aren't really, but it doesn't matter. It's totally okay. My favorite pizza is Supreme. I like Supreme Pizza because, in addition to a whole grain crust, I get several servings of vegetables, including onions, olives, peppers, and the vitamin-rich tomato sauce. Supreme Pizza also gives several servings of protein from both the cheese and the 2 kinds of meat. Restating, particularly in the middle of the day, students are not going to find the time to buy, prepare, and eat a number of different healthy foods found on top of one slice of pizza. Looking at my paragraph, it looks like that. Looking at my paragraph relative to the other paragraph, it looks like this. This happens all the time, and it's just so magical. When I follow the same functional framework, I end up with very similarly length paragraphs. And if they're not perfectly similar, do I know where I need to work on one before I move on? Yep. Now we're going to jump up to the introduction. So now I'm going to get to writing what the reader will read first. Again, what I already had in my introduction was this position statement. I'm going to modify this position statement by summarizing the support, the supporting ideas that I've already articulated. So should it be easy for me to summarize what I said in the paragraph after I've already written that paragraph? Yes. So in my first paragraph, I wrote that leftover pizza is quick and convenient. That maps to it requires little time. And pizza is nutritionally balanced, maps to is balanced in its ingredients. Similar language, it's modified. I'm finally now going to get to what the reader's going to read first. When the student starts by trying to read what the reader will read first, it takes them a really long time. They haven't really warmed up their cognitive structures about the particular topic and task. It's a little bit more abstract. I've seen a 30-minute essay very quickly become a 20-minute essay because the student stares at the blank screen thinking about how do I introduce this topic, where getting down into the body paragraph, the language becomes a lot more accessible, a lot more concrete. Let's have them get warmed up before they start trying to talk about this topic at more of the abstract level. This idea of a hook, something that's going to like grab the reader's attention, right? As if they're writing for like, I don't know, Vanity Fair or The New Yorker, right? How novel is what we're writing? Not very. So us spending 10 minutes thinking of a quote or a poem or a joke to kind of grab the reader's attention, really an unreasonable cognitive demand that I would not recommend. What does the writer need to do? They need to explain what the general topic that's being discussed is and identify why is it discussion worthy. Why would we be talking about the foods that college students should eat?
Can I clarify?
Yeah.
Or ask a clarifying question? You're thinking more on proficiency placement writing, not like necessarily what they would write in the university. Or...
Yeah, I mean, when you get to university and you're being evaluated on more mastery of material and concepts, you can't be as liberal in like just talking about whatever. Like you have to be true and correct. But in the case of your language being what's being evaluated, you don't necessarily have to be as constrained, if that's...
Because I'm thinking about Keith Bowles. I don't know that he would agree with some of the things that you're saying, but I think you're talking about it more from like the evaluation perspective, like
Sure.
showing me what you can do with the language versus doing this academic task.
Yeah.
Because
I
I
mean,
think there is a place for a hook or some.
Sure, yeah,
thought.
and a certain, like, depending again what the task is asking you to do,
Yeah.
and given an unconstrained amount of time,
Yeah.
doing something that
Sure.
is truly
So this is
captivating.
30
would be
minutes.
different.
Okay. Okay.
We're talking about within a constraint.
Yeah. Got
Okay, so I need to establish why this general topic is discussion worthy. Here we say, okay, well, what's my general topic? My general topic is food. Food can tell you a lot about a group of people. If we want to better understand a group, examining their food choices can be revealing. But specifically, right, in this instance, we're not just talking about things in general, food in general, or people in general. We're talking about looking at specific people in specific situations. As a result, many people are interested in what is the best food for different people in different situations. College students are an interesting group to examine in this way. Now come kind of all the way down to what the prompt was asking me to do. Here I'm going to meet the options. In this case, there were kind of infinite choices that could have been made, rather than in some instances or some prompts where you're just choosing between two. So meeting the opponents lists out some of the possible options that other people might choose. Some would say that the best food for college students to eat for lunch is ramen, a sandwich, salad, or soup. Although some people would eliminate all fast food, what am I doing? I'm addressing the counter-argument. The counter-argument to my argument of leftover pizza is that pizza is not healthy, it's fast food. Fast food could never be the best food. Okay, I'm acknowledging that counter-argument. Although some people would eliminate all fast food, leftover pizza is the best lunch food for college students because A and B. If we look at my introduction, it's looking complete, well developed. If I look at it relative to my body paragraphs, we notice that it still looks complete, but it's likely going to be a little bit leaner than my body paragraphs that I fully developed with some of these examples in this application of the principle. Jumping down now to the conclusion, if the introduction was fast for me to write because I've been primed in writing my body paragraphs, my conclusion is going to be even faster because I start my conclusion out with what I finished my introduction with. I restate, there's an inversion, where my introduction went position, support, my conclusion is going to go support, then position. And I'm actually going to invert, again, the topics of my body paragraph. Here, body paragraph 1 was about pizza being quick and convenient. Body paragraph 2 was about being nutritionally balanced. Introduction, it went 1, 2. Conclusion, it's going to go 2, 1. That sounds like something like, because it provides students with the nutrition that they need while requiring little time and preparation, leftover pizza is the best food for college students to eat. It's highly rhetorically appropriate to do this inversion. Also, it means that I don't have to think of necessarily new language. I'm making enough changes structurally that I can really just rehash the same language that was in my introduction. Again, how do I finish up my argument here? With a call to arms or actions. Let's raise our pitchforks. From an individual level to a global level, what should people do? It seems to work magically with 3. Individual, group, everyone. Well, at the individual level, college students should think of the next day when they order a pizza and increase their order size and save some for later. From a group or organization perspective, pizza restaurants should look for locations close to campus and support campus events to draw in student customers. Finally, society should accept pizza as a good food for those old, young, and in between because of its many advantages when eaten in moderation. Vote for pizza. Okay, if we look at my conclusion, again, it should appear to be, as it does, well developed. If I look at it relative to my introduction, it's also very similar in length. When my students ask how many recommendations do I need, or descriptions of consequences for inaction, enough until it's the same length as your introduction. Only gimmicky if it doesn't work, and it does, so then it's a strategy. What do we see in terms of my symmetry from top to bottom? Looking pretty good. We look at allocation of time. Again, that's the critical element here. We're trying to help our students give the best sample of their language possible, given the constraint of time we have. 3 minutes to kind of navigate the prompt, identify the position and supporting reasons. Again, there's some writing that happens in that 3 minutes. We don't have this. If we're watching them write the 30-minute essay and they haven't started really writing until minute 23 or minute 22, there's an issue. 7 minutes to write supporting paragraph number 1, 7 minutes to write supporting paragraph number 2, 5 minutes to write your introduction, 5 for conclusion. This becomes really generous because the more often you do those things, the faster it becomes to do an introduction and a conclusion, giving you ample time to look over what you've written, helping our students to navigate their own grammar, identifying mistakes and correcting those mistakes before things get submitted is part of what our goals should be in a grammar class. And they're done. All right. So what? Now what? Therefore. For there. What questions do you have? What applications do you see, Nick?
I'm wondering if we could have that PowerPoint slide or the presentation available.
Yeah, definitely.
That'd be great.
How would you apply this in a foundations class?
Great. At the foundations level, it depends on where I'm at, but the students at every level are ready for some of these functions, particularly if we start to look at the body paragraph. That's where I would focus my attention. To be a 3 on kind of our scale, the student needs to have one well-developed paragraph. So if I am Foundations B or even Foundations C, I'd really focus in the development of those supporting ideas and then starting to demonstrate some of these functions. I might drop like define and describe as a function that I was using in a Foundation C class, just because that requires maybe a little bit more linguistic command than you'd expect. But I definitely would talk about, the strategy of using variety in sentence length and having my identify sentence be really short and direct. A lot of times what students will want to do is they'll want to lead with explaining their supporting idea before they've said what their supporting idea is, and helping them to understand the value in that order. If I just give a bulleted list of reasons why for something, that's going to be hard for me to end up with an essay. And then at a lower level class, focusing in on that personal narrative, because it's such an important part of conveying why I feel the way that I feel, we jump a lot more quickly to like defending an opinion, and we don't give enough time to, can I articulate a personal experience, and not running from that too fast, getting control and mastery of tense, so that they can effectively apply experiences they've had is a really critical language skill.
So would it be
So you wouldn't
beneficial?
necessarily overwhelm them with the full picture,
Yeah.
but it's like, okay, let's say someone wants you to tell them what the best lunch food is. Okay, and you're going to tell, what's the personal example you could use? If you feel like it's fruit, well, why? Well, where I come from, and then they're going to tell a story about a time they ate an apple. And so that's some of where I would go to take it down a level. Like academic, foundations A or B, where you're really just looking at sentences, you're maybe not ready to do functions. But you need higher than foundations B, you can start doing some of these functions, for sure. Other questions? There's so much power in modeling. So where I would take, if I was teaching right now, where we would go from having had this overview, it would be like, all right, well, let's change the food. Let's suppose that pizza is not the best food, lunch food for students. Let's say that it's cold cereal. Go. Oftentimes also when I'm just starting out with students giving these functional, or getting experience with these functional descriptions, is I will give them their position and I'll give them their supporting ideas. And then they'll just go through and do the rest of it. That way they're all writing and expressing the same things, and it's easier for me to make effective use of examples and give feedback for that. Other questions? So you should go home and you should write a 30-minute essay following this template. I often will tell my students, and when I'm in like a TOEFL prep situation where a student's like maybe going to take the TOEFL this Friday, I almost ask them to excuse themselves from the room, because unless you have an opportunity to practice this a couple of times, there's a cognitive load required to kind of keep all of this at hand and accessible, and that can have a detrimental effect unless you've really worked it out a couple of times, maybe without a time constraint. But pretty quickly you start to see this. This also becomes a map to evaluate the student's expression in terms of how complete that they did on an assignment. We'll just have this as a rubric and then check, 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 meaning a question mark next to the functions that I'm not sure if I'm seeing in their writing, or having them evaluate their own writing or the writing of a peer by looking for these functional domains. Other questions? Cool.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Other questions about grammar? There were some questions about the diagnostics. My understanding as a teacher in the program and not the skill area supervisor in the program is that it's a Canvas module that you pull into your course and then have them do the Canvas quiz, and then you should have received instructions from Brooke about.
So it's already done, we don't need to do anything?
Right. Well, you'll put it into your class, and then there's some evaluation after they've done it that requires some work on your end.
I don't know if we received that email about that, but I'm sure we will soon.
She did. She sent it out April 12th. April 13th, she sent the reserve to the computer lab. April 21st, she sent the instructions.
I'll send it to Ben, and he's going to push it out again.
I just
We have
wanted
it,
Lost it.
yeah, I have it, I just wasn't sure, because
Yeah.
different classes have different things, so I wasn't sure.
Right. Other questions? Well, it is 2:35. According in reality, in this computer's world, it's 2:45. That's our time. Thank you for your attendance. Good luck.